So here we are, the promised addendum to our webinar. We're gonna go because there were so many questions when Marzia was here that we could fill a whole episode with just those questions. That's not what we're gonna do, but we're gonna extend. We're gonna add the questions that people have asked and just follow up for the next 30 minutes or so. We're gonna get through as many as we can. So Marzia is gonna give us a part of our brain on the questions that people ask, and I'll make sure that we can cover as many as we go. Marzia, how are you doing today?
I'm ready.
Ready to rock. All right. So in no particular order, I hope we can get through everything, but here we go. So let me start with an easy one, or maybe it's a hard one. We'll all see. It's from Rizwan Zaidi. I hope I pronounced your name right. How would you use design thinking and service design together when it comes to journeys?
Okay, if you do service design, you are already using design thinking. So these two things are not two separate things. Service design is a practice, so it has certain principles and practices and tools attached to it. Design thinking is a mindset that underlines any design practice. So design thinking is part of graphic design, is part of industrial design, is part of service design. They're not two separate things. One is just a big container of the other.
How do you, this is my follow-up, but like journey serves blueprints, the customer journey map has always been part of these practices, right? Has always been part of the toolkit. Are they like mutually exclusive? Can you be doing design thinking or service design without journeys at all? Not really. Or can you? Parts of the work.
I don't think you can do service design with the journeys at all, because it's the sequencing of the service is a fundamental aspect of service design. And the most common way to do it is journeys. I don't think you can do sequencing without journeys.
Right. Tend to agree. So let's take one from Bianca Mara Tedesco. She asked, how do you cope with non-CX teams or non-experienced teams just wanting solutions implemented fast?
They are a stakeholder like everyone else. The point here is that you want to involve these people throughout the journey, right? You want to involve these people in the development process from the very beginning. The fact that they're coming, asking fast means that they're not part of the working group, right? They're coming from the an external view, an external, point of view from the working team, demanding certain things, right? They're not part of the working group. And that is a problem. It's a problem with any type of stakeholder. So, in this case, you will have people asking something fast. In another case, you will have people asking for something cheap, right? Everyone will have their own, perspectives and their own requests. The important thing is to, create a joint journey together towards a collective shared outcome. That's always the answer when it's about stakeholders and stakeholders engagement.
Right. So you're saying even if people want to take cut corners, taking a step back, being slow is usually better to then go fast again, because this is also something that comes up a lot. And like sometimes the service design process or our journey management feels slow because there's some figuring out to do before you can dig in. Once you get up to speed, it should be faster than what you're used to, right? Because prioritization flows.
It doesn't necessarily have to be slow at the beginning, right? The thing is that people tend to follow the process by the book, right? They go like, oh, there is a first, diamond, and then you have to diverge, and then you have to have a moment in which you converge. That's by book, and that's all great. But if you've done this for like 15 years, then you get to a point where you can, jam a little, right? And so maybe you don't start, if you realize that the need is speed, you don't start with a 3 to 6 months research piece. You probably start with prototyping already, some hypotheses, right? And so that people can already start seeing value in practice of what you're doing. And then you can embed research at multiple points during your own process without having it to be too waterfall. I see a lot of design teams really going waterfall, almost like methodological about the process. And there's no right or wrong with these things. As long as your insights are deeply ingrained into a customer perspective, and as long as you keep testing, experimenting with the things that you're doing, and as long as you engage all of these stakeholders in the right way throughout, then you can play with the different pieces of the process and the methodology as you see fit, the context. I mean, service design is an extremely contextual practice.
Right. I think that's a good point, because when you start with something, you do need a framework, because otherwise it will fail. But to your point, at some point you let the framework go, right? You don't even think about it anymore. I remember when I was design thinking practitioner, when I was teaching teams to do this, it became easier and easier as we went. But when I was doing my first few projects, I was like literally opening the book again, like problem statement,
What's that
definition.
again?
How might we, like, those kind of things you need in the beginning, right? But at some point it will come natural. And I think the same is with journey management, right? The customer journey, to map it out. Yeah, that's a practice. But at some point it's like, no, we just need the customer perspective. We need the data. We need the insights to form an opinion on what the most important opportunity is. And then we're going to quantify and then we're going to prioritize. But it's all about it. And the frameworks become less relevant, but you need them to kickstart things.
Yeah.
Right. All right. How do you evaluate, shifting gears a little bit, this is a deeper one. How do you evaluate the maturity of an organization you work with to know that they are ready for your work, the type of work that you do with them, right? To help them actually put these layers in place.
I actually saw this question while we were talking, and I wrote an entire blog post a few days after to answer to this question.
Oh, nice. So I missed that one.
It is under designmavericks.substack.com. Is one of the latest, and I think it's called Organizational Maturity. But really the point here is, and I'm going to summarize because we only have half an hour. So the point here is, people tend to think about organizational maturity as a ladder, right? So you move from one level, that is level 0, where you basically have no capabilities, no abilities, no understanding of this thing, to level 1, where you understand a bit better, and level 2, where you can actually do a bit more. Level 4 usually is five steps, right? And so if you go online and you type organizational maturity, you will get all of these ladders in all sorts of different sources, right? You will have some coming from strategy, from design, from organizational change. Last year, I ran a large piece of research with 5 or 6 European countries. And we surveyed about 300 CX experts in all these different regions, and we interviewed about 16 of them. And basically what you discover is that the maturity of organization is not a ladder, but is a loop. So organizations go through a loop that encompasses always kind of somewhat the same stages. So, there is a moment of awareness and a moment of developing capabilities and setting up the measures and being able to prove value. And those, but they will go through those stages at different times in higher and higher level of maturity, right? And you will have different parts of the organization there will be at different loops at the same time, right? So you will have a team in one side, in one function of the organization, they will be already tried that loop a couple of times and really got to a point where they have a good articulation of value, the metrics in place where they can actually generate and prove impact in practice, right? While other areas, they're still at the beginner's phase, right? Where they've gone maybe through the loop once with a very low maturity level, but using examples from other spots of the organizations to actually progress, right? So there is not one maturity of the organization. There are multiple maturities in an organization, and there is not one fixed point because you're always in a journey, if you like. There is no end point because customer centricity, you evolve with it. You evolve with the demands and the needs of the customer, right? So it never ends. It's not that you understand it how to do it once and then you're done. That there is no such a thing. So you will always be in a journey to actually be better and better. Responding, but also, anticipating needs and expectations. And so my problem is never the organizational maturity. I really don't care about that. What I really care about is how invested are the people that I'm dealing with, how keen they are to actually make change happen, and in what way they are networked in the organization to be able to actually engage all the different stakeholders needed in the journey. That's the only thing that I care. The current organizational maturity doesn't really matter. Actually, to be honest with you, sometimes it's better when the maturity is lower because you have, a blank sheet. You can start from scratch rather than working with organizations that have been through those loops a couple of times, maybe not in the ideal way, maybe not engaging the right stakeholders in the right way, creating a lot of toxic relationships or difficult, boundary objects to go around. So I don't think the organizational maturity is an issue. I think it's an important point to reflect upon. I think it's amazing if you have the chance to actually map all these different maturities and all these different groups, so you can use it at your advantage, if you like, to plan your work. But it's never like reason not to work with a client or to choose to work with a client, right?
Right. But what you are saying is there must be someone willing to make an investment commitment to do
Right.
this, right? That is also a sign of mature organizations that know that it is important. And
it's a sign of a mature stakeholder. I'm not sure whether it is a sign of a mature organization. I work with organizations that hire, 60,000 people, 270,000 people. If you have one enlightened sponsor, that doesn't mean the organization is mature. It's just that they got lucky with that hire. You know what I mean? And the person is at the right, spot in the organization with access to the right people and the right resources. That's it. So you might be just lucky. That doesn't mean anything about where the organization is at.
I agree. Okay, so this was a question from Betsy Reyes, so I hope it was answered in a nice way. Let's move on to a next one from Pamela Leon. Leon, I hope I say it right. Any experience with a top-down versus bottom-up approach to coordinate journey management in an organization where service design wants to take journeys to the next level? So I think she implies that it's a bottom-up motion, but she has like any experience where service design wants to take journeys to the next level, doing it top down versus bottom up?
I assume that by next level, we mean moving from just mapping into using it to make decisions and to take decisions in an organization. So this is my assumption on what next level means. You cannot just have either or, you've got to have both, right? So one of the determinants for me to really decide whether to actually start a relationship with an organization in the longer term, because some of these transformations go, from 5 to 7 to 8 years, right? So you're really investing into a relationship in an organization. Is the A team with the right capabilities to actually push the work in the day-to-day, but at the same time, do we have enough sponsors that are at the top that can actually release resources and actually protect the team at the beginning during this work, opening doors during this work. Everyone has leaders have one role, which is, releasing resources or creating remit for the team, connecting with the people that are absolutely in need to be part of this process. But the team in the day-to-day that actually develops the work is there to actually create momentum, generate things that people can believe in, right? You cannot do without, you need both. You cannot just do without the leader sponsoring it, but you cannot do it without a competent team to run the program. And so if you don't have the leader, if you don't have the sponsor at the top, you should just stop doing whatever you're doing and just go find the person. That should be like priority number one. And I usually say, it's just not enough to have one person. You should have at least 3, right? Because these people change jobs, their interest changes, the priorities change, and they also, go in other organizations at one point. And you cannot put all your eggs in one basket. You cannot just depend on one sponsor, one person that believes in what you're doing. So that is like the number one thing to do before even starting doing anything else.
So that service design team, you would say, don't rely on one sponsor from the top. Find the second, find the third, make sure that you have a few.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, otherwise you're not gonna move journeys to the next level. There is no way. It will always be just an exercise of style. Look how beautiful are our journeys, but no one will ever use them,
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's the right way to think about it. So on this, maybe like follow-up one from Angelo Carriera. Spicy topic, as always, I think change management. So how does change management, the presence or lack thereof within organizations, fit with this process? I mean, in the end, we are talking about change management. What I do like to think of, but I don't know if you agree, is that if done right, you can start walking in lockstep with your customer and your business. So your business value, shareholder value is aligned with your customer value. So maybe this is the last transformation you're going to go on as a company, but it does require change. So Angela asked, how does change management actually fit with this process that you're describing?
For me, change management is one of the stakeholders you have to deal with, right? Equal to product, equal to marketing, equal to strategy. Everyone has a piece, represents a piece, or owns a piece of what you're trying to do. This is the beauty of, service design or design teams, that they are horizontal, they are cross-functional, they cannot work in a silo, right? So the only way you can do this type of work is to involve horizontally all of these different people. So change management has one slice of what you need. And so it's fantastic if a function of that kind exists in an organization, because it's not always obvious. But the point is how you're going to engage them, because, a lot of the work that you will try to do, they will tell tell you, it's our job, it's our remit. What are you trying to do, right? You create change in what way? And so I think, you can leverage the infrastructure that these teams usually have, the remit that they have, the credibility that they have, by partnering with them. And so that's the best way to go about it. But the same thing could be said with a lot of other stakeholders in an organization. The same thing could be said with strategy, right? A lot of the work that you will do with this kind of, journey management and journey mapping and, the framework and the decision making and rituals and operating model, a lot of it is a remit of strategy. So in what way do you work with strategy? They will tell you this is our work, right? So it's exactly the same thing. It's just one principle that gets replicated with all of it. It's not hard.
Yeah, you mentioned rituals.
Hard. The principle is easy.
Right. It's easy. But you mentioned rituals there, and I think maybe that's a nice thing to dig into a little bit. What are the rituals that you've seen around this work that are good, that are enforcing the right behaviors that you want to have to support this lasting change? Like, can you give a few examples of what you've seen?
This is a very good question. So I think it's twofold. On one side, you have rituals which are soft, right? Things that new routines that teams embed in whatever way they do work. And the other thing is boundary objects, is artifacts that actually force you change process, right? Or change the way you do certain things. And so for one clear example is investment proposals, templates, right? So usually when I get into organizations, these investment proposals, so basically these are used by teams to ask at a certain point in time within the budgeting cycle for money, right? So you want money for a project. And usually those templates have fundamentally very simple business cases, right? So they look at cost, they look at revenue. The interesting thing about these templates, these artifacts, is that no one ever goes back to actually check whether these business cases were right? So you feel it in once, and then you get this money, and then you do your thing, and no one ever goes back saying, "Oh, let me check whether the business case was actually right, so that we can learn something for the future." No, they keep the template exactly the same. You just tick the boxes, get the money, move on. So one thing that one of the first things that I try to influence, which is great because actually everyone has to fill in these templates at one point, independently from which department you're in. I try to introduce a section which is about the customer. So asks, for example, which pain point this project or this thing is addressing, in what way this is going to improve the customer experience. So what that does is it forces teams, especially tech teams, to go and check. So they will have to find a team that works with customer insights, and B, try to understand in what way this is impacting it, because otherwise they cannot fill in the template. And so you are basically forcing them to a process through compliance to actually do a thing, right? But then the ritual that emerges out of work of this kind is new connections with teams that you have probably never talked with, probably check-ins with the team overall over the period of time, once a month, to start, making sure that whatever you're doing, matches whatever their research says, right? So the next time you have to do or fill in a business case, you have that connection ready. You have your, duck in a row. So you see, it's twofold. I think there are rituals alone, I don't think they're enough. I think it's important to really engineer artifacts that can push behavior in a different way. But new rituals are also helpful to, establish certain ways of working. Another example is when I usually start working with new operators. So, I usually start working with these transformation programs. And usually one of the first things that I say is that we need to start thinking about the operating model of this, because working with these artifacts, with this way, making decisions this way that we are describing, requires a fundamental different way of going about work and going about relationship between stakeholders. And the answer is usually, yeah, it's too early for that. It's too early for that. And I let them go, I let them go and I go, okay, that's good, that's fine. I mentioned it. I will say, I told you so, but let's wait. And so after usually 13 to 14 months, they come back saying, "Oh, no, we can't deliver on this. We need a completely new operating model." I go like, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we need. So the first thing that I usually do is new rituals. So outside of the formal structure, because that's hard to change, I go look, what are the forums where people take decisions that impact services in a way that at this moment is not described as such. and introduce new agendas, new agenda points in that meeting, right? Or introduce new people in that meeting. So these are very low threshold, if you like. You can work with the informal organization to do that, but it's a very high impact because for once, then people start talking about topics that before they never even considered, right? So if you have a bunch of product owners coming in together to actually discuss, different products, and you add a layer of service on top of it, and then you start having a conversation in what way your service or your product is influencing the service, right? You're completely shifting perspective. You're maintaining the same meeting, so the formal structure is the same, right? But the agenda topics slightly start changing, right? And this is the first, if you like, step for larger changes later on, right? You go step by step and to allow, there's something that is absorption capacity, right? You want the organization to be able to absorb whatever change you're bringing at any given time, right?
Right. So sneak it in to the existing decision-making process and build from there. That's basically like a very small but good ritual you can do from day one to get it done. Shall we talk a little bit about teams? I have a few questions from people on team structure and setup. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think Ron Polka asked, have you seen teams managing journeys in their org with dedicated journey teams? Any best practices around this that you've seen?
I already mentioned during the webinar, I think, that I'm not a big fan of journey managers as roles, right? In the way I've seen it implemented is that basically they become another silo that is completely disconnected from other things. And if you don't get to the right level of granularity of journeys, which usually organizations don't, because they don't have a framework to define what granularity is. So you usually use a inside-out way to think about journey. Then it's really counterintuitive. I mean, it becomes a disaster, basically, because they go around claiming that they are customer-centered, but at the same time, they created a complete different silo that is completely disconnected from everything else. So
because they make just to clarify, they make the journey within their silo, within their department, within their
so
scope.
it becomes a unit. It becomes a unit that looks at this specific few boxes, right? But then it's the same approach that you would have with a product. Then it becomes, a thing that is completely disconnected from the rest. So I rarely work with, people that are all of this kind. And if I do that as one of the stakeholders I deal with, right? So I'm not the best person to talk about that because I just don't agree with the concept. So what I usually promote is a service owners, so service managers, like the people that are, covering a complete service end-to-end, within which you would have a number of journeys, within which you would have a number of products. You might not necessarily have a journey owner manager, you might have a product manager, but then, underneath a journey, you might have 3 or 4, underneath each service, you will have 3 or 4 journeys that doesn't necessarily have one responsible person, right? It could be under the service management team. As you see in the framework that I developed, the services are very much the anchor for everything else, right? So I will never attach an owner or a manager to something that is a variation because the journey changes all the time.
Right. I like that. There's also one other perspective to share. What I've seen work really, really well is that first, like, I agree, like it can't be that you have a journey within a silo because then you're still like practicing the wrong type of customer centricity. If you understand that the journey cuts across these different business silos and you have a service manager that owns it, that's fine. But within the journey, you have different roles and still someone who's coordinating is a valid role to have because you need to have consistent flow of insights. You need to have data accuracy. You need to have that prioritization to be happening every week, every 2 weeks, every month. And that is, I think, where I do see a need for journey managers in a way that they are responsible, just like product managers are responsible for keeping the cadence, managing the roadmap, making sure everyone is aligned.
Yeah, but that's a more operational role.
100%. Yeah. It's not, and that is the thing. Like people ask me a lot, hey, should we have journey owners? No, you don't want to have journey owners because, we all know what happens with the product owners, right? They know best. Sorry, product owners, if you're listening. You're not that one. You're the different type of product owner, I know. But like, there's a lot of product owners who think that they own the product. They literally can make any decision they want. That's a risk. And I think that is the risk that you're describing as well. Last question for you today before we wrap up, Marzia. Time flies when we're having fun. This is more like, let's assume you have this crystal ball to look in the future. How long will it take us to see the majority of businesses having adopted adopted a journey-centric way of working from where we are today, how long do you think it will still take to see that like tipping point?
Fundamentally, I think, the way organizations are structured is very much a structure that is thought to respond to the needs of a world from a century ago, if not more. Unless we completely rethink our conceptualization of organizations and the reasons why they're here, I don't think customer centricity will ever be the norm. It can't, it will always be, if you like, an exception. And I think this really requires a fundamental shift in our collective, level of awareness and consciousness about the very concept of organizing work, right? So I really don't see any trend that tells us that, happen anytime soon. There's always hope, but I struggle to believe it. I mean, with the shift that is needed is really one from a conceptualization of an organization as a machine to one as an organization, as a living being, right? That is able to adapt, that is no longer command and control, but is able to see in the future almost, to generate plausible futures and adapt to those, right? And so the shift, we're still, there are probably a handful of organizations on this planet that are actually able to do that. There are way more organizations that are embracing journeys as a concept, but they do it bolted on whatever is there, which is fundamentally rotten. So it's really hard. You try to make something that is customer-centric fit a structure that is fundamentally not, that is designed for scale production, for efficiency. The metaphor behind it is just another one. And so, the click is hard. There is no real puzzle there,
I hope you're wrong. Let me put it that way. I mean, it's not a new idea, right? It's been floating around for more than 100 years. I think ever since manufacturing became a thing, we struggle with this exact point that you're making. Let me be the optimist and say, hey, we finally realized that that's not the ideal way forward. But I can also not imagine that in 50 years from now, we're still like product first or manufacturing first or process first. Can't be the way. So maybe
the very concept of our organizations today was invented in 1890.
Exactly.
1890. Okay. So it's been like and I'm sure the people in the 50s, they were thinking, I cannot believe that in 2024 we will still think this way, but we do. So I don't know. I hope you're right.
Yeah, it's just 120 years, right? We'll live to see it, hopefully, with this generation to see if we can change the world. All right, Marzia. Thank you so much for doing this follow-on. I think it was super useful to get your perspectives and to have some questions answered. Any last words for our audience before we wrap up today?
Subscribe to my blog, designmavericks.substack.com.
Nice. We'll put a link in the show notes and you can follow Marzia there. And until we meet again, thank you for tuning in. Bye.
Bye.